I'm delighted to be here, and I'm even more delighted to be speaking to the man who allowed us to eavesdrop on the intimate conversations of Claire and Frank Underwood, who took us behind bars with Piper Chapman, allowed us to review the case of Stephen Avery, and most recently, to go on the stranger and stranger mother's quest of Joyce Byers. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome to the stage Ted Sarandos.
Choice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh yes, was I on the wrong? Did we decide on the
Perfect.
Perfect, excellent. Well, Ted, you've been at the RTS before. You were here 3 years ago. I'm delighted to welcome you back. You arrived at Netflix at the turn of the century, and since then, alongside...
Suitably dramatic when you say it that way, yeah.
It's a millennial moment. Since then, alongside Reed Hastings, you've turned the company into this game-changing, this revolutionary video streaming, taking Netflix from being a DVD rental company to global leader in on-demand video. Now, an absolute key part of that, and in some ways one of the most daring things, is that you also became a commissioner, and a big commissioner of content, and indeed you are chief officer for content. So currently, I think you have something like 30 originals in production, is it?
In production,
more or less?
as we said, yeah.
Yeah.
30.
So how...
By the way, that's 30 scripted series. There's still 35 original children's programs. There's 60 different documentary projects that are in different stages of production right now. A dozen feature films. Local language original productions in 9 countries are not included in that count as well.
So how involved are you personally in that? I mean, do you greenlight every single one of those?
No. I think my team, and I have an exceptional team who oversee a lot of this work, probably have more buying power than anyone in Hollywood individually as well. So we have a really culture of freedom and responsibility that extends to those buyers as well, which is that we pick the right people and get out of their way and let them do the best work. That's the way I deal with my team, and that's the way they deal with creators that they ultimately work with.
Now, you mentioned the scripted series and gave some idea of the other things like children's programming, but
right.
Aside from the dramas where the feature films or scripted series
right.
and the documentaries, talk shows, Fact End, and so on, I mean, are there any genres that you're thinking of including?
Well, right now, the newest thing we're encroaching on is the competition series, and we're trying to do it in a very global fashion. We have a show called Beastmaster. It's a physical competition show where we're bringing in contestants from 6 different countries with 6 different announcers from each country. So when the show plays in Japan, it'll feel like a very Japanese show with Japanese announcers, all in Japanese, featuring the Japanese contestants more prominently than the others. And we shot the entire series simultaneously for each country. So it's the first pass we'll take with 6 countries, and then in success, we'll roll it out to more.
So what is the competition? What's the jeopardy there?
It is a course that is about 2.5 football fields long, 8 stories high, an obstacle course that is inside of the body of a mythical beast. And as the athletes go through the different parts of the beast, they are slaying the beast ultimately. We're doing it with Sylvester Stallone executive producing and on screen, and with Dave Broom, who created the Biggest Loser for NBC and The Briefcase for CBS, and it's a pretty massive undertaking. So.
Will the beast be specific to different countries?
It'll be the same beast it'll be a different beast every season.
Okay.
So.
But I mean, what's interesting about that is the time sensitivity, obviously, of that. So that's something new for you.
And our intent is we're gonna experiment a little bit, which is very in the spirit of what we always do, which is we'll release an episode a week in some territories, and we'll release them all together in others.
So it doesn't rely on sort of picking up. As it were.
No, one of the things that attracted me to the project was the success of American Ninja Warrior and the way that people are watching that show in reruns in very high numbers after everyone knows who won. and then in even higher numbers on YouTube clips of who won, of the winning runs. So I think it's the show itself is compelling storytelling. It's the story of the athletes. It can be as exciting as the competition itself, which you see in the Olympics and other coverage like that too.
So, but in terms of other events, you're still going to steer clear of things like sports and news and all that?
Yeah, I mean, so this is, I'm kind of in the never say never camp in many respects, but in this case, it's a competition show, but it's very different than others, meaning that it isn't going to be that dependent on you tuning in every week to find out, so you go to work and talk about what happened last week. I think people are evolving their viewing habits in a way that accommodate that for everybody, whatever time schedule they're on.
And your first foray into UK commissioning came a couple of years ago, and we're about to see the results, because Netflix emerged victorious against several very well-known broadcasters, Fuller, Thanks, The Crown. And we've got the newly released trailer, which we're going to be able to take a look at now, please.
This just released today, first time, yeah.
Well, that's clearly, you know, we're going to be gripped. I can see that. It's clearly stunning. It's got all those Netflix hallmarks. It's, you know, kind of big budget, big names, and you also commit for more than one series, you know, still very important.
Yes, this is launching on November 4th everywhere in the world, all 10 episodes. And last week we did a read-through with the cast for the entire second series that will go into production imminently. So,
I mean, and you're also co-producing Our Planet, and I think you've got a UK call-out for fact and ideas as well. So, I mean, do you have a view of how you might go forward in terms of, you know, UK productions?
We're very engaged beyond The Crown and beyond. Our Planet won't, it's been in production, but we won't see it until 2019. It's a 8-part series that will capture the kind of the last remaining wildernesses in the world in spectacular 4K, and that's from the creators of Blue Planet. But beyond that, we also, in October, we're launching our new season of Black Mirror globally. This is 6 new episodes that are Netflix original, that are the way that people fell in love with the original series. I think they're going to be blown away by the scale and scope of the new series. And we also picked up a canceled series that used to be called, unfortunately, titled Scrotal Recall, but is now retitled Lovesick. And it's a very charming show that people, I think, may be more free to check out under the title Lovesick, and the creators agreed. So we have those 3 original series going on top of that, and to your point, more to come as well. What we find is that we have had such success with British programming in the U.S. and around the world, with Happy Valley, with Peaky Blinders, with The River, that it's a natural extension of that for us to commission original British programming. What you saw on the screen there is not a Netflix version of The Crown or a U.S. version of The Crown. It's a very British production, and that's our intent. And
it will show that way all over. It won't.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But I mean, can I ask you a little bit about your relationship with the creatives and the producer community? Because I mean, you know, you've not been in this business that long, but you've been extremely successful in a short time. And slightly conflicting reports occasionally come in. The Hollywood Reporter said recently that Netflix was becoming quite controlling of its producer community. On the other hand, you get people like Andy Harris said, you know, last month he'd had no better experience than working with Netflix on this, and that you know, there'd been no. He said it was the best professional experience of his career, no great influence on casting or writing or anything like that. However, isn't it inevitable that the more successful you get, that you are bound to feel more sort of confident creatively and more inclined to intervene?
No, and we work very diligently to avoid it. I think the only way that we can work at the scale that we're working. Remember, 4 years ago, we weren't producing any original programming. This year, we had 17 different shows nominated for 54 Emmy Awards. And the only way you can work that way is to build upon this same culture that we built Netflix on with creators. And our job is to pick the right shows, pick the right storytellers, and create an environment for them to do the best work of their life. That Hollywood Reporter quote, it was an unnamed somebody who said so-and-so. Our creative involvement in the shows is collaborative, but always invited. That's the thing that I impress upon the team all the time, which is that if you are not collaborating with the show by the time it's in production, then we have failed in some way, that we haven't been invited into the process. But we don't impose ourselves on the process creatively, but we're very collaborative, absolutely.
But you know the market better than anybody else, though, don't you? You know your market.
Correct, and I think what people want, and people want a sounding board. They want to, what do you think of this? Are we on the right track? So when we say we allow total creative freedom, part of that is everybody wants to make a great show. And so to the extent that we can be helpful in that process, we are. To the extent that it's in great hands, it runs off in great hands. And I think that's what Andy was talking about, The Crown. I'm not going to give creative notes to Peter Morgan. I'm not going to do it.
But the growth in the content budget has gone from 2 billion, I think, to 5 or 6, is it really now in current?
6 next year, yeah.
6 next year.
And if you go back a little bit further, our first streaming budget in 2008 was 10 million. So.
yeah, exactly. So, but that's, in terms of this sort of original content, that's just over 3 years or so. You can't possibly sustain that level of growth and investment, can you? Well,
we're on track to. I mean, I could show you on paper where it's all going to go. And I mean, what you've seen is a doubling of our original programming output every year for the last 4 years, and I think we're on track to do it again. And we've been able to maintain the quality level at a very high mark. And I think it's not trying to do brand-defining things, letting the shows create their own brands and define their own brands under our umbrella. And when you do something like a Fuller House or The Ranch, that it's the best version of that show that it can be, not trying to do everything that feels or looks the same.
Now, the CEO, Reed Hastings, has said that originals are more efficient than acquisitions. Now, when you're talking about $100 million for 2 series of House of Cards, or indeed apparently £100 million for 20 episodes of The Crown, $120 million for 10 episodes of The Get Down. I mean, these are all the figures that are around. Whether or not you agree with them, I don't know. But we're talking big figures here. How do you actually work out what that efficiency means? Does that mean that there are more hours watched per dollar spent when you have original content than acquisitions?
Correct. So if you look at the pool of spending for original programming relative to how else you would have deployed those dollars licensing high-profile content in second windows, the original programming gets more viewing. So then layer on top of that the other efficiencies of the spend in terms of the brand creation and customer acquisition and the distinguishing Netflix as a destination rather than another outlet for the same programming that other people will carry as well.
So if you were going to have a 50-50 split, maybe, of originals acquisitions?
Yeah, I think our CFO had said that at a conference last week, that that's where it's heading, and that's where we set out to do many years ago. And it's always been in success. We'll just keep pushing it. So if we hit to a place where we're missing more than we're hitting, or that efficiency metric goes the other way, we may revisit that number. But that's our intent, is to bring most of our programming original. And that's because, remember, we have a global audience to serve, and the rules of second window licensing with other people can be very cumbersome because they're obviously built for a different era of television than we're operating in.
And is there a distinction between the kinds of things that you're likely to commission as originals and what you might be looking for in acquisitions?
Yeah, I mean, I think for our original stuff, we're looking for things that are kind of more brand-defining, tentpole shows, like The Crown, which is produced at a scale that I don't think most networks could step up to. Because our audience is large and global, and the story is incredibly global, we can invest heavily in a project like that. The Get Down was an expensive show. Baz Luhrmann's films happen to work all over the world, which is great. When we make a show like House of Cards, even, the work that David Fincher did on that show, this is why I really do like to work with filmmakers as they enter the television world, because they're historically big films have always been more global than television. Now that's becoming more and more the case, that TV's traveling more globally as well. But I think a lot of that is influenced by the move from filmmakers into television.
And I suppose that also begs the question that it would seem that probably it would be much more efficient, in your terms, for you to make a long-form TV series with a filmmaker than perhaps make a one-off feature.
Oh, definitely, because the cost of it is spread across more hours of watching, and it probably have longer shelf life as well.
So why commit then to feature films as well?
I think it's a distinctly different art. We have with all the success of the golden age of television and all the success we've had in this period of time, about a third of the watching on Netflix is still movies. So that's, and keep in mind, this is 2-hour movies versus 13-hour shows.
Old movies or new movies?
Well, most of the movies on Netflix are old. Yeah. So depending on where you are in the world, we have certain studios that will have at the earliest in the pay TV window, which is 7 to 10 months after theatrical. So I've always I've been of the mindset that that pay TV window is probably the most out-of-step licensing window with the current generation of television watching, as you can imagine. To have people wait 7 to 10 months in the internet age doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think what you end up with in these pay deals is movies that either people saw already because they were excited about them, or they made a conscious decision not to see them at any point between the time it opened in the theater and the time it was on DVD and the time it was on VOD and the time it was on an airplane and the time it was in a hotel room. So by that time, the movie itself it's a much more casual transaction when you watch it, where I don't think people assign a lot of subscription value to that watching activity. So we're investing in film so that we can more aggressively give the consumer what they're telling us they want, which is the movies when they open. So, and in some cases, we'd say they'll be on Netflix instead of opening in theaters. And those movies they need to be the kind of movies you would see in the theater for people to get that. So that's why we're doing Bright, which is Will Smith's next movie, David Ayers is directing. So in between Suicide Squad 1 and 2, the cast and director are making Bright, which is a potential future franchise, we hope. We have a movie called Okja with the director Bong Joon-ho, who just made a Snowpiercer last year. He's one of the very celebrated Korean director. We have Brad Pitt's next movie called War Machine. And so these are very large-scale movies. We have Christopher Guest's next movie, Mascots, coming soon. So it's a very diverse slate, but you should think about it like a studio slate. Action movies, comedies, dramas, big movies, small movies, but all premiering on Netflix, either simultaneously with theaters or instead of in theaters.
Now, the kind of current co-productions you've got with British, Wash It Down, Paranoid, Last Kingdom, and indeed the renamed Scrotal Recall.
Yes. People will miss saying Scrotal Recall, you have to admit.
Yeah. So, I mean, how do co-productions fit into a strategy that increasingly makes a big thing of exclusivity?
So I think we produce with broadcasters around the world, and we figure out window sharing all the time. So we're producing a show right now in Italy with Rai, called Sabora, that will take the first window, and they'll follow a year after, and we'll premiere it around the world at the same time. In other cases, we're doing 5 or 6 productions in Canada, where the Canadian broadcaster will take the first window, and we'll take the rest of the world. And we are in co-production agreements right now with ITV, with Channel 4, and with BBC on several projects. We'll announce at least 4 more before the end of the year of these co-productions, where the British broadcaster will take the first window, and then we'll follow, but we'll launch it on Netflix around the world outside of the UK. And I think the reason why we want to do this is we have really diverse taste. I mean, people have very diverse taste, and they use Netflix unlike they'd use any single network. Our subscribers will spend about 2 hours a day watching Netflix. So we're trying to fill a lot of use cases for TV viewers, from kids watching in another room or on an iPad, to parents watching on the big screen television, and everything in between. So in there, we're looking for a lot of diverse storytelling, a lot of diverse genre, a lot of diverse sources in terms of countries of origin for content. And so in that case, we want to have a really healthy co-production relationships all over the world.
And in terms of this whole push towards world domination, in January, I think Netflix said that it was available all over, technically sort of available all over the world. And so obviously you start with Canada back in 2010, Latin America in 2011, and the UK here in 2012. But I mean, it can't be progressing in the same way all over the world. I mean, you must have had some places where it's going a hell of a lot better than you were expecting, and other places where it lags.
Well,
any insight into that?
There's no use of the word domination anywhere.
Okay.
You brought that
one. You couldn't possibly say. But,
exactly. Yeah. But we are. So we launched in January basically everywhere we weren't. And that takes us to where we are today, which is everywhere except China, North Korea, and Syria. What we're finding is they all have a different rate of growth. They all have different levels of adoption. What we did in January basically was turn on the lights in 130 countries where we weren't previously operating. We brought our global original content to those countries for the first time. In many of those countries, they were not available in the local language. In most of those countries, didn't have any local banking options, and the website was also in English. So we've been now, since January, rolling out country by country localization efforts, localizing the user interface on the website, giving local banking options, investing more in local programming for those countries. So the localization effort is localizing in every way. And last week we did Poland and Turkey, and we've been rolling out pretty aggressively since.
And is the demand for local content stronger in certain areas?
It depends. I mean, Western content, I'd say English-speaking content from the UK or from the US, travel brilliantly. In most countries, if you look at the most watched television shows, the most attended movies, this is the localized versions of those films and television shows. But throughout Asia, that's not always the case. So you'll find some places where the taste for local programming, by way of example in Japan, is much more ferocious than it is anywhere else. So you look at China, Japan, and the mix of local programming to international programming is more like 70-30, where typically in the rest around the world it's flipped the other way.
So, I mean, logistically, just, for your strategy, it must be really complicated working out exactly what balance you need in all the different territories. And in terms of, as you go forward, that is going to make it really complicated.
And that's why it was so important what we did in January. Basically, when we're in the market, we can learn immediately. We start getting a feedback loop of what people are watching. The people who are most satisfied with the service, what are they watching? Because remember, usually if you're tracking box office and TV ratings, you really only have a snapshot of what people are watching with the options that they have at home. Where the more compelling thing is to look at is sometimes piracy data in those countries and see what content they're stealing. And then you get a much more accurate picture of the local taste. So in many of the countries where we're operating today, it's the first time that they've had access to the content that they've wanted to see, the content that everyone else is watching around the world, and they're happy to pay for it. So what we're seeing is piracy. We've seen the traffic to all the BitTorrent sites drop dramatically in these countries that we've launched since January. And we've seen it in Australia, we've seen it throughout the Nordics. In these high piracy markets, we've seen the piracy drop dramatically since Netflix launched.
And to cite Reed Hastings, again, in 7 years' time, he says he thinks that wants Netflix to be in 1 in 3 households globally. How are you going to achieve that? I mean, what do you need? What are the key things that you need to achieve that? And is it going to be more platform tie-ups like the recent with Liberty and Comcast, Netflix channel? What kind of thing?
Well, the idea is to reduce the friction points between the consumer and our content as much as we can. So that's distribution relationships like you're referring to. It's also just creating brands of content that people really want to have and must have. And the 7 years, 1 in 3 households model is the trajectory we've been on since we launched our streaming service 7 years ago to now. We're in about 1 in 3 households of the markets, of the mature markets that we've been in. So if we continue to follow on that trajectory, we can hit that number. And then we've gotten there much more quickly in some markets. So remember, 5 years ago, we barely had a subscriber outside of the US, and today we have 36 million. So.
And are there great things in terms of the way people are actually going to be watching, the way they're going to be consuming the content that you're watching for in the next 5 years or so?
Well, it's an interesting thing when you're commissioning programming early. Sometimes you don't know how people will be watching that show that you're going to be launching in a few years because the technology is moving that quickly. But what's great is I think what we try to be is have our content on every screen that's connected to the internet. So if you want to watch on the big screen or if you want to watch it on your phone, I think people my age think more about screen size than people my kids' age who watch everything just as comfortably on a phone or a laptop that they watch on a big screen TV. And I think it's going to be that ubiquitous where people will make those trade-offs about where they want to watch and how they want to watch. And the size and shape of the screens are going to continue to evolve, bigger and smaller. And we just want to make sure we're connected to all those different devices.
Yeah, because, well, you can be connected, but does that affect content at all in terms, because some things do play bigger and different form and better?
Yeah, you know, one day I watched my son watch Lawrence of Arabia on his phone, and it made me a little sick to my stomach, but he enjoyed it just as fine. He's a filmmaker. He's an aspiring filmmaker.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if he can just reproduce that, that'll be fine.
You know, it's interesting. It's what will change with the access to content and the device on devices. What it really changes, I don't think it's the creative in terms of the screen ratio aspects or any of those things. What it really changes is, I don't think I've ever. I can tell you, only one time I remember ever walking out of a movie. I rarely turn off a movie that I start watching. I commit myself to it. I'm going to watch it. I'm an optimist. I know that something good's coming, even if I'm not enjoying it. But again, my son, who's 20 years old, he told me he leaves about 1 in 3 movies that he goes to. And I said, why would you do that? And he takes his phone and he said, everything ever made is right here. Why would I spend time with a bad movie? So what's going to happen is when people have a lot of choice, is the bar is going to continue to rise on the quality of the production and the stories that are being told. And either you're going to be making very good films for very small audiences or spectacular films for large audiences, but the bar is going to be raised on all those things as people have choices, and they can vote with their checkbook and get up sometimes and walk out. Then I think that will influence the creative in a much more profound way than screen aspect ratios.
But I guess that also then begs the question about if you're going to have that generational shift in tolerance, people who, there might be a higher churn in subscribers then at that point. Do you think?
Well, that's why
easy enough to switch off.
And that's why when people ask, why are we making so much programming? People's tastes are really diverse, and we're not making everything for everybody. We're making content for audience segments, and we don't have a demographic on Netflix. Remember, you're watching, your brother's watching, your grandparents are watching, sometimes in the same house and sometimes on the same subscription. So that's why we have to make such diverse content and so much of it to make sure we're appealing to many tastes. It's not just we're not making just programming for the cities or the rural countries or just for kids or just for adults. We're making programming for everybody.
Now, in terms of your second quarter earnings report, slightly bumpy performance, it would suggest there was, subscriber growth was slightly slower than expected. Are you still confident to the commitment to material global profits in 2017?
Absolutely. Nothing has changed in the longer-term outlook of the company or in our long-term view of the growth of internet television. It's going to be an enormous global business. Internet television, we're going to play a very meaningful role in it. Being able to predict the path of that on a quarterly basis is something that we will miss every once in a while. Because the rhythms of that are very different. We're not in a stagnant environment, or we're not in a predictably growing environment in terms of pace of adoption. We're operating in countries now we have not operated in, but what we've seen is the countries like our early Latin America launch. We were very nervous when we launched in Latin America. It didn't take off quickly. Broadband infrastructure was rickety, and payment structures were non-existent, and it's a rocket ship for us today. So, and we wouldn't have predicted how slow we took off, and we wouldn't have predicted how quickly we've gotten to where we are today either.
But are you still confident on a path to profitability outside the USA?
Yes, we're absolutely. What we're seeing is it's following the same trajectory of our other international launches. It's just at earlier stages.
So it's all in line. It's just a question of. It isn't that you've got a different kind of curve completely in the US.
No,
you're still
no.
operating on the same kind of curve.
We are a public company. We give public guidance, but we don't operate on a quarterly basis that way to where we're trying to optimize for quarterly result like in that way, trying to get to a number that, remember our forecast number, we don't forecast a range even. We forecast a number. So if we get that number right, have me start buying your lottery tickets too. So sometimes we're going to be a little over, sometimes we'll be a little under. But the course and the trajectory and the growth are all on track.
Great.
Yeah.
Time for some questions from the audience. A tremendous opportunity to put some questions to Ted. There are roving microphones, as you know. If you get the microphone, could you please stand up and identify yourself?
Hi guys, Peter White from Broadcast Magazine.
Right.
Hey, you talked about opportunities for British producers, and obviously you showed the Crown there for drama. I just wondered if you could get a little bit more on the non-scripted side. I know there's some plans there, and particularly how British producers can approach your teams in the States, or if there's any plans for sort of London people. And secondly, whether Netflix Studios, if you could tell us a little bit about that, your sort of own production division, and whether that might sort of start coming outside of the States.
Sure. So we are embarking on a lot of unscripted programming. We have, I think, 20 different unscripted programming, unscripted shows right now that are in various states of pre-production and production that will be original Netflix shows in various unscripted genres. Some extremely global, like Beastmaster, which is meant to optimize for local taste, and others that are just global that we think will travel. There's no immediate plan. We have an office in London that mostly focuses our PR and marketing, and we'll have a few folks here to start working with local producers as we've ramped up both our original productions in the UK and our co-production partnerships. So I imagine we'll have people on the ground in short order, but it's not. But there's not I can't tell you that there's a great process of how to reach out and do pitches. My team is very active at all the festivals and markets, and work closely with all the agencies and take pitches nonstop all day. So.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Hi, Kate Dean. Hi, Ted.
Hi, Kate.
I just wanted to know what you think the optimum volume of content is to make available at any one time. So the merit of rotating content off versus building, significant masses of shows.
Well, like I said, the tastes are so incredibly diverse that even in great success, any one show represents a very small percentage of total viewing on Netflix. So we continue to grow out so that we're catching not just the various tastes, but even various moods. So I think some of the really exciting ways that internet television can evolve is recognizing device and time of day that you use device, and recognize that if it's an iPad and you're home at 3 o'clock, it's probably your kid's watching, and the UI evolves to be more close to not just your taste at any one time, but your taste at 3 o'clock. So I think that does require a lot of at-bats, a lot of different content to fill those needs. So I don't know if there's an actual level. We keep pushing it because the more we invest in the programming, the more watching that we're getting, and at some point, those returns won't continue at the same trajectory. Then you'll know you're getting to the edge of it anyway, and we haven't seen that edge yet.
Hi, Krishna Arora from SBS in Australia. I was interested in what you said about co-production of dramas with, I think you talked about RAI, Italian public broadcaster.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, what is the thinking behind that? Is that about financially de-risking the production, or do you think the level of commissioning control that you often get in those public broadcasters, that's something that you actually want, maybe to give some comfort to the creators?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's the IP that the broadcaster has rights to the IP that we're trying to produce. In other cases, I think what it does is it helps us get to scale faster by taking on some of the production risk and working with very well-established producers in those markets when we're pretty new there. In Australia, by the way, we're one of the top employers of animators in Australia right now. So we're doing a lot of work over there as well.
Paul Herbert, Goodman Derrick. Ted, did I understand you to say that your main place of operation is in the USA, not in the UK or Europe?
We have an office in Amsterdam. We're a large office. My content operation is pretty US-centric, but which means my people are traveling around the world constantly.
Where are editorial decisions taken?
Both in Amsterdam and in the UK and in the US.
But am I right in thinking that you're regulated by Ofcom?
Correct.
Yeah, even though you're not UK based.
Correct.
Hi.
I think I'm sorry. I may have misunderstood the question. We operate as an EU company.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and you're subject to the video on demand regulation.
The EU regulation.
Right, but not via Ofcom, by the Dutch equivalent, is that?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Kate Bulkley, I'm a journalist. Technology, obviously you guys have really pushed the envelope on technology. What about VR, AR, doing a lot in 4K? How important is that to you? Is it sort of like saying, oh, we can do this, and broadcasters can't do this as easily? And also the second thing is, we heard this morning, you're getting onto a lot of set-top boxes.
Yep.
And that's a way to get bigger audiences. Are you going to control the consumer experience or the customer data? In other words, are you going to try to keep hold of that? Because that's been one of your big USPs as well, technologically, is the data.
No, I think VR is something that's exciting. I think it's probably more exciting for gaming than it is for narrative storytelling. And you're seeing a lot of advances there that I think can be really transformative. I've yet to kind of see what the real role that will play in narrative, which is kind of where we're more focused. 4K is something that's important to us because, to your point, I think what we've tried to do is push the expectation bar up high on both the quality of the content and the quality of the image. And it was very unintuitive just a few years ago that you'd think the highest quality image that you would get would be delivered on the internet versus on cable or satellite. And that is happening today in our ability to deliver 4K stream around the world. So. Yeah, and I think like I said, we're trying to reduce friction points for our subscribers to get the content to their television, and the set-top box helps. That's the idea. So it's in its infancy, though, so we'll see.
Okay. Sorry, this has to be the last question because of time. Yeah.
Hi, Ted. My name is Paul. I'm from Luxembourg. Will you be working at all with novelists for the serializing of fiction and maybe the convergence between publishing and visual content?
We are today all over the world in optioning works that we are then developing in. You'd asked a question earlier about the Netflix studio and our role that we'll play, and that's an example where we're, through the studio, are acquiring different properties that we're developing into TV and film projects. And the studio itself is ramping up, and probably our biggest success for the Netflix studio to date has been Stranger Things, which was all developed and produced in-house and has been a great global success for us.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your questions. And on behalf of the RTS, Ted, I would like to thank you. We would love to go Netflix style into another session immediately, but unfortunately,
to wait 20 seconds.
Unfortunately, the way the afternoon is planned, this is not a possibility. But I know everybody at the RTS is delighted that you came, and thank you very much for sharing your insights. Ted,
thank you.